Charles Carroll was a Maryland aristocrat and a devout Catholic who became one of the wealthiest signers of the Declaration of Independence. Charles Carroll of Carroll II, the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence, was born in Annapolis, Maryland on September 19, 1737. He came from one of the most prosperous families in colonial America. He had an aristocratic demeanor. Carroll's land holdings were vast, stretching across thousands of acres. He was educated at home by private tutors until the age of 8, when he was sent abroad for his education. Then in 1748, young Charles sailed to France to attend Jesuit schools, beginning an educational journey that would last nearly 2 decades. Charles Carroll was raised in the Catholic faith at a time when Catholics faced severe restrictions in Maryland and throughout the American colonies. In 1757, Carroll moved to London to study law at the Inner Temple. He immersed himself in legal studies and the Enlightenment philosophy that was sweeping through Europe. The young scholar absorbed the ideas of liberty, natural rights, and representative government. After completing his legal education in 1764, the 27-year-old Carroll returned to Maryland, one of the most educated men in the colonies. His father, Charles Carroll of Annapolis, was among the wealthiest men in America, and young Charles stood to inherit an enormous fortune. Carroll returned to a colony where Catholics could not vote, hold office, or practice law publicly. Despite his extensive legal training, he could not pursue a legal career because of his religion. In 1768, Carroll married his cousin Mary Donnell, known as Molly. The marriage strengthened the family's already considerable wealth and social position. Carroll settled into managing the vast family estates, which included ironworks, mills, and thousands of acres worked by enslaved people. Charles Carroll was a slave owner who held hundreds of enslaved individuals across his properties throughout his lifetime. He managed his estates with the same careful attention he brought to his studies, keeping meticulous records and constantly seeking to expand his holdings. Carroll became one of the wealthiest men in America, with assets that would be worth hundreds of millions in today's currency. In 1773, Carroll entered the public arena through a newspaper debate that would make him famous throughout Maryland. Writing under the pseudonym First Citizen, he engaged in a heated exchange with the colonial governor's supporter over taxation and representation. Carroll argued brilliantly against arbitrary taxation and for the rights of colonists. The First Citizen letters revealed a sharp legal mind and a passionate advocate for colonial rights. Though everyone soon knew the author's identity, Carroll's eloquence won him widespread admiration. For a Catholic barred from political participation, he had found a powerful voice through the press. The debate transformed Carroll from a wealthy landowner into a political figure, demonstrating that ideas and arguments could overcome legal disabilities. Carroll began to oppose the increasingly oppressive measures Britain was imposing on the colonies. America felt that Britain, its mother country, was exploiting it for taxation and not giving it the freedom that it deserved to chart its own course. Charles Carroll was not initially among the most radical voices calling for independence. He was a cautious man, aware that revolution meant risking everything his family had built over generations. But as tensions escalated, Carroll became convinced that reconciliation with Britain was impossible. His wealth gave him much to lose, but his principles demanded action. In 1774, Carroll was appointed to Maryland's Committee of Correspondence, despite the legal barriers against Catholic participation. The revolutionary crisis was forcing Maryland to set aside its anti-Catholic laws. Carroll's abilities were too valuable to ignore. In 1776, the Continental Congress sent Carroll on a critical diplomatic mission to Canada. Joined by Benjamin Franklin and Samuel Chase, Carroll was tasked with persuading French-speaking Catholics in Quebec to join the American cause. The mission included Carroll's cousin, Father John Carroll, who would later become America's first Catholic bishop. The Canadian mission ultimately failed, as the Quebecois chose to remain neutral, but it demonstrated the trust revolutionary leaders placed in Charles Carroll. In June 1776, Maryland finally authorized its delegates to vote for independence. Carroll was elected to the Continental Congress, arriving in Philadelphia in July. He had missed the July 2nd vote for independence, but he was present when the engrossed declaration was ready for signing. On August 2, 1776, Charles Carroll stepped forward to sign the Declaration of Independence. According to legend, when Carroll signed, someone remarked that he would not be easily identified since there were other Charles Carrolls. In response, Carroll added of Carroll II to his signature, clearly identifying himself and his estate. It was a bold gesture, marking himself unmistakably for British retaliation. Carroll was literally signing away his fortune, his lands, potentially his life. Charles Carroll was risking more than most signers in terms of sheer wealth. His property holdings made him perhaps the wealthiest man to sign the Declaration. But he never wavered in his commitment to American independence. Carroll served in the Continental Congress through some of the darkest days of the Revolutionary War. He worked on committees managing the war effort, dealing with finance, and organizing military supplies. The war years tested everyone's resolve. Carroll used his own fortune to support the cause, purchasing supplies and lending money to the struggling government. In 1777, Carroll returned to Maryland to serve in the state Senate, a position he would hold for many years. He worked to establish Maryland's new government under its constitution. Carroll helped manage Maryland's contribution to the war effort, ensuring troops were supplied and the state met its obligations to the Continental Congress. The war dragged on, year after difficult year. British forces threatened Maryland multiple times. Carroll's estates were vulnerable to British raids, his fortune at constant risk. Yet he remained steadfast in supporting independence. When the British surrender came at Yorktown in 1781, Carroll was among those who had sacrificed greatly for victory. In 1783, with the war over, Carroll faced the challenge of rebuilding. His estates had suffered from years of war disruption. The new nation faced enormous debts and economic uncertainty. But America was independent, and Carroll had helped make it so. He continued serving in Maryland Senate, working to establish stable government in the new state. In 1788, Carroll supported ratification of the new federal constitution. He believed a strong central government was necessary for the nation's survival. Maryland ratified the Constitution, and Carroll was elected as one of Maryland's first United States senators. In 1789, Charles Carroll took his seat in the first United States Senate. He served alongside other founders, helping to establish the procedures and precedents of the new government. Carroll supported the financial programs of Alexander Hamilton, believing sound finance was essential for national success. He voted to establish the National Bank and to assume state debts from the Revolutionary War. Carroll served only 2 years in the Senate before resigning in 1792 to return to Maryland State Senate. He preferred state politics and managing his estates to life in the temporary national capital. Carroll remained active in Maryland politics for many more years, serving in the state Senate until 1800. He was a Federalist, supporting strong government and commercial development. Carroll invested in numerous ventures to develop Maryland and the new nation. He was a major investor in the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, America's first commercial railroad. In his 80s, Carroll participated in the groundbreaking ceremony for the railroad in 1828. As the years passed, the other signers of the Declaration died, one by one. Carroll watched his fellow founders pass away, carrying the memory of that momentous summer of 1776. By the 1820s, Carroll was the last living signer of the Declaration of Independence. He became a living link to the founding, revered as a patriarch of the Revolution. Visitors came to Carroll II to meet the last signer. Carroll received them graciously, sharing memories of the founding era. He corresponded with younger generations, offering his perspective on the nation's development. Carroll witnessed enormous changes in America during his long life. The nation grew from 13 colonies to 24 states. The population exploded westward. Democracy expanded, though not to everyone. Carroll had complicated views on slavery throughout his life. He recognized slavery as morally wrong and occasionally spoke of gradual emancipation. Yet he never freed his slaves during his lifetime. He continued to profit from enslaved labor until his death. This contradiction marked many of the founders, including Carroll. They proclaimed liberty while denying it to hundreds of thousands. Carroll remained a devout Catholic throughout his life, living to see many restrictions on Catholics lifted. The religious freedom guaranteed by the Constitution that Carroll supported allowed Catholics to participate fully in American life. His cousin John Carroll became the first Catholic bishop in America, establishing the church's hierarchy in the new nation. Charles Carroll's success and prominence helped demonstrate that Catholics could be loyal, productive American citizens. His example helped break down centuries of prejudice. In his final years, Carroll lived quietly at his estates, surrounded by family. He had 7 children with his wife Molly, who died in 1782. 3 of his children survived to adulthood. Carroll's son Charles Carroll Jr. predeceased him, dying in 1825. The loss devastated the elderly patriarch. Carroll's daughters and grandchildren cared for him in his final years. He remained mentally sharp, corresponding about politics and current events into his 90s. On November 14, 1832, Charles Carroll died at his daughter's home in Baltimore. He was 95 years old, having outlived all other signers of the Declaration by more than 6 years. His death marked the end of an era, closing the generation of the founders. News of Carroll's death spread throughout the nation. Cities held memorial services honoring the last signer. Newspapers published tributes celebrating his life and service. Carroll was buried at his family chapel in Baltimore, laid to rest with the Catholic rites he had practiced faithfully throughout his life. Charles Carroll's legacy is complex and multifaceted. He was a champion of liberty who owned slaves. He was a Catholic in a Protestant nation who helped establish religious freedom. He was an aristocrat who supported Republican government. He risked the largest fortune in America for independence. Carroll represented both the ideals and contradictions of the founding generation. His wealth came partly from enslaved labor, yet he used that wealth to support American independence. He believed in liberty and natural rights, yet failed to extend those rights to the people he enslaved. Carroll's life spanned nearly a century of American history, from colonial times through the early republic. He witnessed the birth of the nation and its growth into a continental power. His signature on the Declaration of Independence, clearly marked of Carroll II, proclaimed his commitment to American independence. That signature represented a willingness to risk everything for the cause of liberty. Carroll understood that signing the Declaration meant possible execution for treason. He signed anyway, adding his estate's name to make his identity unmistakable. Charles Carroll of Carrollton lived longer than any other signer, becoming the last living link to that momentous decision in Philadelphia. His longevity allowed him to see the results of independence, the establishment of constitutional government, and the expansion of the nation. He saw democracy take root and flourish, though imperfectly. Carroll's life demonstrated that American identity could encompass religious diversity, that Catholics could be patriots and founders. His prominence helped establish religious pluralism as an American value. The contradictions in Carroll's life reflect the contradictions in America's founding. The nation proclaimed that all men are created equal while permitting slavery. It championed liberty while restricting rights based on religion, race, and gender. Carroll embodied these contradictions, proclaiming freedom while denying it to others. Yet his contributions to independence and his willingness to risk everything for American liberty remain significant. Charles Carroll was even in death a symbol of the founding generation, the last surviving signer who carried the memory of independence into the age of Andrew Jackson.